Hello and welcome to Duro's webinar. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. I'm Aphrodite Brinsmead, Duro's Director of Product Marketing, and I'll be your host for the next 30 minutes. Today we're going to hear about how to scale electronic hardware products successfully. You'll learn more about who Sento is, and you'll walk away with 8 expert tips. Before I introduce our guest speaker, here are some very quick housekeeping items. Firstly, the webinar will be recorded and you'll be sent a copy of the recording and slides after the event. Secondly, the advantage of attending live is that you have the opportunity to ask questions. You'll be on mute, but please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get them to them at the end. And finally, we'd love your feedback so we can improve for next time. At the end of the event, a link will appear to a survey. It'll only take a minute or two, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So let's get started. I'm excited to welcome our guest speaker, Wouter Potman. He's based in Medellin, Colombia, but originally Dutch, and has 20 years of supply chain experience working with Dutch multinationals, like Heineken, which I'm sure you've heard of. For the last 5 years, he's been working for Sento in Colombia as the Director of Operations, and he's passionate about helping companies scale their hardware products. Someone who shares that passion is Duro's own CEO and co-founder, Michael Corr. Before founding Duro, Michael spent over 20 years designing and manufacturing various hardware products, from IoT devices to wearables, drones, and clean tech products. Michael has managed production both in the US and overseas. So I'm sure this is going to be an exciting conversation. Welcome, Wouter and Michael.
Thank you, Aphrodite.
Thank you very much.
So today, Wouter's going to give a quick update on Sento's journey, and then we're going to dive into some valuable tips for you. I'll hand it over to you, Wouter, to get started.
All right. First of all, thanks for having me here. I'm very happy to be here in this call. As Aphrodite was already saying, I like helping startups, so I think it's very cool here today to hopefully be able to help some of you guys with the 8 tips that I will be sharing in the coming minutes. I think Aphrodite already told everything more or less about me. There's maybe some interesting questions. What am I doing in Colombia? How did I end up here, etc. Because of the time, I will save them for any questions later after the meeting. But I'm working with Sento since 2018. However, the company Sento started already back in 2015. It was founded by 2 Colombian nephews, Germán Suárez and Nicolás Gómez. And they started with this idea that the agriculture industry in general is very old-fashioned, let's say, in the use of technology. And they started with the idea, hey, let's improve that, and specifically, let's improve the production in poultry farms and pig farms, with the idea that with technology you can get much more output out of these farms to help solving the food problem. So started in 2015 in the, let's say, the ideation prototype phase. We had to do a lot of research, understand like what it is to operate in a farm environment. I can tell you that's a little bit different than putting some equipment in just in a house or in a building. And you have to test if the idea that you have originally in your mind, if that is working. So the idea that we have for the chickens was that we could weigh a chicken through a load cell. So the first in the in the ideation phase, we only had to test if that idea that we had, or that hypothesis, if that was working. So that's what we did. You can see the picture on the left top. It didn't look beautiful at all, but we validated that our idea was working. And that's when we went to the MVP phase, minimum viable product. It was back in 2016, 2017. And we learned in that during the first phase a lot about the environment, about the users, about the industry. We did a lot of testing, and we really discovered here, hey, what is working, what is not working, what is necessary for the farms and what is not necessary. And this is the part where you need to understand technically everything about your product, how it's working, before you move on to the next phase. In this phase, we were not yet reliable with an extremely poor user experience, but at this phase, for us, that didn't matter. We went to the product development phase at the end of 2017, And this is really the phase where you need to start thinking about, hey, how I'm going to design it for manufacturing, design for compliance, how can I produce this device in large quantities. So you can see the product, it was not still perfect, but it has already a much more robust design. It's focused much more on the user, and it was actually ready to scale. But you will always see when you're developing a product that you can test everything up front in your office in a simulated environment, but you're always going to encounter things that you never can think of before. So just to share you one of these things about this poultry scale that you see on the right top, you can see just above the black handle, there's a LED light. And we didn't know at the time that with certain colors of the LED light, the chickens are really curious about the LED light, so they start touching the LED light with their mouths. And right next or right below the light, there is the on and off button and the reset button. So we had a lot of equipment just switching off, and we couldn't figure out what was happening, and it was because of that. So just yeah, funny example of that. So that's a little bit a quick overview of our history, and we started producing in higher quantities in 2018, and we encountered a big problem there, and that was, hey, we're growing too big for our kitchen or a garage, as I always say, but we were too small to produce like the whole production or larger quantities in China. And we also felt like, hey, our product is not yet ready to produce it in super large quantities. We felt that electronics were really well done, but especially in the electromechanical part and how all the components in the device are working together, we felt that we're going to do still a lot of changes. So we thought it doesn't make sense to produce big batch sizes. We want to produce small batch sizes. But yeah, nobody wanted to do that at the time. German and Nico didn't have an idea how to scale their operations, so they contracted me. I had a lot of ideas about large-scale operations from Heineken and DSM, global networks, but I didn't have any knowledge on electronics, so I did a quick deep dive, let's say, in electronics. I went to see a lot of factories in the US and China, and I saw a lot of factories here in the environment of Medellin. And after that, I think you can switch now to the next. Yeah. And we decided to start producing or let's say our farm equipments in the following setup. So the first thing I decided was the sophisticated electronics, where we already knew, hey, they're quite okay. We don't expect many changes. I decided to produce them in China. Price, quality-wise, at that time and still now, I think you cannot compete with China. There are other reasons for not producing it in China, but price quality wise, it was the best place for us to produce it. It's after you produce like an electronic board, it's still small, it doesn't weigh a lot, so you can easily ship it around the globe. At the same time, I found out that Colombia has a very good ecosystem for producing plastics, metal, packaging. So I decided, hey, the electromechanical part of the assembly, I can just do that in Colombia, ship the electronics from China to Colombia and do the rest of the assembly there, which made a lot of sense because we kept it close to home and in the place where we were expecting the most changes. It was just, right under our noses, so it made a lot of sense. The factory, we opened it in a tax-free zone, which is an interesting place because it gives you a lot of benefits. And from there, we shipped most of our products to the US. I think you can already go to the next, Aphrodite. Yeah. So here you can see a little overview on the map. What are we doing? So you see Colombia, you see all the blue countries. That is where we are exporting our products to. And there's some products that didn't fit on the map or not on this map. That's Netherlands, Spain, India, Taiwan, and Thailand. So far we have assembled 75,000 devices, of which more or less 40% go to the US. We've developed over 40 different products, and in total we export to 18 countries. And our team is about 45, but the majority of that is the engineering team. An important thing to mention is originally we were called Sento, or back in history Vantu, but now we're called Sento Electronic Scaling Hub. Because more or less 2 years ago, we decided, hey, that problem that we encountered with being too big for the kitchen and garage, but too small for the bigger volumes, it's a common problem that a lot of hardware startups are facing. So why don't we use everything that we've built, or knowledge, or infrastructure? Why don't we use that to help other startups? And that's when we started Sento Electronic Scaling Hub. And some of the examples of the companies we're working with, you can see it below. KiwiBot is a very known one in the US, drives around on the universities to deliver food, coffees on campuses. And you can see Intake Health, and it's a sensor to measure hydration through urine. And there are some other examples. There's the pig vision that is also placed in the farms, but this is weighing pigs just through images. Yeah, Alfred, you can go to the next. So yeah, from this quick overview of our journey, there's a lot of tips. I had to limit them to 8, the most important ones, and so I'm going to share them with you guys. First one of the things we've learned, and that is part of a philosophy now with working with other companies, is that it's extremely important to scale progressively. You have to design your product with assembly in mind, to reduce the assembly operations, and to prevent field failures. If you have a lot of different things in your assembly, a lot of different operations, the chance that something will go wrong is very likely, and the chance that one part in the device is influencing another part is also much higher, which will only increase the risk of failures later in the field. So keep it simple in the design for assembly. Prioritize small batches of production, so not big batches, and try to produce small batches and iterate continuously. You have to be aware, if you produce large scale production, large batch sizes, that you can encounter problems like we did, for example, with the LED light in the poultry scale, that you cannot see before or up front, and it can mean that you spend a lot of money and time on building these equipments, and then afterwards you cannot use them anymore. You have to define not only critical functionalities, but also define critical products. When we started, we developed like 20 products at the same time for the farm. So not only the scale and the pig vision, but also a lot of sensors like temperature, humidity, a lot of different sensors. But for the farmers, temperature and humidity wasn't nice to know, but it was not crucial. The only thing that the farmers wanted to know, how fast are animals growing? What are they weighing? So very important to focus on not only functionalities, but on the products. And optimize at one product at a time. We worked, at least in all of our products, with the same technology, same way that we constructed firmware. So if you focus on one product at a time, it means that the errors that you will encounter, you can solve them easily, and then learn from your mistakes, and in doing the rest of your product. So it's the same thing a little bit if you're producing, let's say, in a way, in an individual way, or producing in an assembly line. In an assembly line, if you produce something and something is going wrong, you will get direct feedback from your quality, and you can immediately improve and let's say, the product in the next batches or in the next products that come over the line.
So Wouter, I want to. Yeah, I love that last comment about optimizing one product and feature at a time. And it's very analogous to how software is developed, with the whole agile methodology of change one thing, make small incremental changes, and you learn from them, adopt from them, respond to them, and you can evolve more efficiently over time to get to a final product that is more likely to be what you and your customers want, instead of delivering it all at once. But software has the luxury of a very low cost to do design iterations, time-wise as well as tangible costs. Hardware doesn't always have that luxury, especially if you're producing a circuit board assembly, or you're sending out mechanical parts for machining or 3D printing. There are real tangible costs and times associated with it, days, if not weeks, to get this feedback. How do you balance that between what is the granularity for what you are evolving in each cycle versus the total overhead cost associated with that? What are some tips that people can think about?
Yeah, I would say, Michael, it's a really sort of a case-by-case thing, and of course it's a question about estimating the risks. So to give an example, We were already quite early in the process. We were, for example, capable of doing a over-the-air adjustment of firmware in the equipment. So there for us, for example, there was not a high risk in doing quick changes there. We knew that if we would put something in the field and something was wrong there, we could easily adjust it. So it's a little bit of a risk estimation every time that you do such an iteration. Of course, we tried always to group some of these iterations, but we didn't like wait various weeks for to gather more of these changes together. The most important for us, with a little bit of healthy estimation of the risk, was to get them out as soon as possible.
And are you seeing a trend in manufacturers and suppliers to be able to lower their costs and timeline to get these prototypes back to customers? So is it enabling the larger community to actually do more incremental changes?
Yeah, well, with the current customers, we see really that they really like having quick batches, quick iterations. And for example, we sometimes produce for customers right now, and during the production, we receive a request to change something. We can do that. And I think that is really shifting. I hear a lot of companies that are coming from big contract manufacturers that are not used to that flexibility, that have to work more or less with the terms of the contract manufacturers. We're, of course, on paper also a contract manufacturer, Michael, but yeah, we're trying to change that world and to make that much more flexible and agile. Yeah. Number two, very important as well, keep engineering and production teams close. So in our case, we have the engineering one floor above the assembly line. So anything we do, the engineering team can see it. And that is really important because supply chain nowadays, and it has been especially in the last 2 years, and Michael knows for sure a lot more about that, has been really complicated, and we had to improvise a lot, be very creative in offering solutions to our clients. And then if you have your supply chain and your engineering close, that is really helpful. So for example, if supply chain encounters that one product is not available, they would like to change it, but I have no clue if that is going to influence the device. And then if you have your development team, your engineering close, you can just ask it to them right away. Or the other way around, if engineering wants to do a change but has no clue if the component is available, how long the lead time is, etc., they can ask it to the supply chain team. So we developed a very cool process for doing all of those new product introductions. I learned, by the way, that NPI in Spanish means something entirely different. You can also ask me that later. So people were like, what is it, this strange meeting that we're going to have? And we learned also that it is very important to be close, if possible, in distance. Of course, we're in Colombia. Most of our customers are in US. That's not very close, but it is also not very far away, and especially if you're talking about time zones. So imagine that you have a product, and like in the example that I was sharing, that you're changing your product while it is in production. Imagine that you have to tell that to a Chinese contract manufacturer that is not working at the same time as you. You have to explain on the email to a Chinese person that maybe is not managing English that very well, that you want to change something during the production. Then you're going to receive a response the next day, and they will probably say that they don't understand. And you easily lose 2 or 3 days already before you can make clear what you really want. The way we are working with our customers right now is that you can have a video call, and you can just show, hey, we're assembling this product according to the instruction, but it looks very weird to us. Are you really sure that you want it like this? And then our clients probably will say, no, that's not what we meant. We want to do it a little bit differently. So that is really helping. And of course, Colombia seems to be very far away, but a flight from Colombia to the US, you can be there already in 3 hours. So that is quite close. So that would definitely be the tip here. Keep the teams close and look for opportunities to nearshore your sourcing or your production.
Great. I think regardless of physical location, this topic is very important. That I think a lot of less experienced engineering teams kind of underestimate the value of including your suppliers and your manufacturers earlier in your design decisions. You brought up earlier that engineers, when they're making decisions, don't always know what the ramifications are going to be, whether it can be procured or the manufacturing costs or lead times associated with it. And so by incorporating your suppliers as you're making design decisions through, your change order workflows or other types of dissemination and review process, it allows your suppliers to provide that feedback much earlier, where the cost to make any changes just for supply or manufacturing purposes can be made much more efficiently. So this is something that I highly encourage customers to do. Don't keep it all black box, tight-lipped until you're ready, because you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities to improve your manufacturability.
Totally right, Michael. Yeah, so number 3, solve quality issues early. You can imagine if you have just 100 products in the field with a small quality problem, it's relatively still easy to solve it. But imagine if you're going to put 5,000 products in the field with the same problem. That is going to require a huge effort from your company to solve these problems operationally, to manage everything with your clients, and then, of course, afterwards also to solve the quality issue for the future. So it's really going to drain your cash flow. So here the big tip is solve. You cannot solve all quality issues, but the major issues that they are there, solve them before you start scaling. Yeah, this is a very interesting one. We have learned from this as well, but we have, of course, now the experience of about 2 years with working with customers. And when we started, we had the idea that, hey, we have such a cool position here in Colombia with cheap or more attractive labor in the same time zone, in a tax-free zone, and close to the United States. So we thought that it was really going to be our unique selling point. But what we've learned with working startups, especially in early stages, is that is not the most important. The most important for all of our customers is speed and agility, to be able to go fast to the market, have quick iterations. And I would say only after, let's say, producing more, like 3 or 4 batches we see with most of our clients, they start thinking more about cost, and they see that cost is getting more important. And that makes sense because slowly your product starts stabilizing. You're going to have less iterations, less changes, and that's the point where you can think about cost optimizations.
Yeah, and it's a lot of, especially early on when you're producing a brand new product and potentially even a new market, your goal isn't to optimize price. It's really to optimize product market fit. How do you know that your customer even wants your product, or that it's designed properly? Or I love the example you gave earlier about the LED and the chickens. Had you built 75,000 units immediately or optimized for price, you would have missed an opportunity to learn that the LED wasn't positioned properly. You probably have more expenses on the back end fixing broken units because you hadn't caught it sooner. And so the shift in priority of like, are we building the right product in the right way for the right sustainability for the right customer, should really drive those initial productions and not driving down costs.
Totally agree, Michael. Number 5, get ahead of cash flow management. Yeah, we have had, I can say that honestly, I see German just walking in right now, our founder, and I can assure you have had numerous sleepless nights about this. It's one thing selling your product and calculating the right cost of the product, and on paper it can look like you're making a profit and that everything is going well. With scaling hardware, you have to think of very long supply chains. So I put an imaginary example here, which is really close to some examples that we've seen. And in most cases, if you start as a startup, being small, you have to pay upfront for all of your raw materials, or at least the majority of it. After that, the whole sourcing process starts, which can take from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, depends, of course, on the components that you're using. Then your product still has to be manufactured. You probably keep it in inventory for a couple of months because you don't want to run the risk that you don't have your product available for your customers. Because you're so small, you're probably not so important to your customer as the other way around. So you have to sell on credit, and then finally you will receive your money. This easily, in the moment where the cash is going out of your company and is coming into the company, can take 10 to 12 months. It is really, really, really complex. And this is, let's say, the example that you see here is in the ideal world. You will see that you're going to encounter a lot of problems that you, uncertainties like components that will not be available, delays in production, delays in shipments, for example, in the containers we've seen especially in the last year. So a lot of things can go wrong, and this time can easily take longer than you're taking into account. On top of that, one thing to keep in mind, if you're growing, which of course is cool. Imagine that you're first building a batch of 1,000 units, and then the next batch you're building is 5,000 units. It means that the cash that is going out is going to increase. So your cash flow problem is only going to increase with the growth. And to put it simply, of course, there's a lot of things that you can do to solve that problem. But if you don't solve that problem, you're going to run into the problem that if you're going to grow, your cash flow is just at one point becoming such a huge problem that it can kill the company.
Yeah, it'd be a shame if you ran out of cash before you got paid. I'll let your team go.
Sorry, Michael?
Oh, it'd be a shame if you had a great product and you ran out of cash before you actually got paid customers. And
totally. Yeah, we had the luxury, Michael, that we were backbones, I would say, by a big multinational. So we had some cushions in the past to solve this, but we have had a lot of sleepless nights about this one.
Yeah.
Number 6, concentrate on growing your business and don't be afraid to rely on partners. I put here, stay away from operations. No, and I really mean it. Managing operations, logistics, sourcing, it takes a lot of time. It takes already a lot of time if you just have to manage it normally. But imagine if you're seeing issues with components or issues with quality with your production in China. It will take a lot of time. It can completely drain your energy. And it's really like distracting you from what you should be doing, and it is focusing on your core business, where you should prioritize the improvement of your product and your growth, and channel your energy more towards business development. Even if you're trying to stay away a lot from operations, a big tip here would also find a partner that can offer you a turnkey solution. Like, for example, we are offering. That means that you only have one point of contact that will just arrange all these operational problems or challenges for you, and you don't need to have contact with 10 different suppliers at the same time. Seven, keep tariffs in mind. We, of course, know a lot about this specific item because we are in the tax-free zone, so that offers a benefit if you know very well how to manage it, of course. Tariffs work like this. They are based on some rules of origin of the goods, so that depends, for example, on the value that you add from a certain country to a product, or it can also mean where does the product undergo a significant transformation, as it is called. And that will determine the declaration of goods, and the declaration of goods will determine the HS code, which is the international tariff code. You can find them all online. The HS code finally decides the amount of tariffs that you have to pay. I'm sure most of you people have already heard about the trade war that has been going on for some time now between China and the US. And what we see that most tariffs that you need to pay on electronic components or on finished products, there are at least 6% of the value of the product, including all of the logistics costs for getting it into the US. But we see regularly tariffs that are 25 or even up to 35%. So that is really something to keep in mind. And especially if you're planning cash flow, this is something that you have to keep in mind on top of that. A possible solution, again, of course, is nearshoring. So, for example, if we are making the KiwiBot that you have seen before, this actually, you can state that it's made in Colombia, which makes it possible that it can enter the US without paying any tariffs based on the economic trade agreement that there is between the US and Colombia.
Awesome. And we are at the top of the half hour, but I know we have one more tip and we'd love to get some questions answered. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to the final tip. Thank you.
Thanks, right. And the left 8 is think about your post sales and maintenance before you start. Like putting, let's say, 5,000 products somewhere in a farm or in another different industry is one thing. But what happens if they fail in the field? And what are you going to do? Are you going to offer support to the clients, or are you going to develop a model that is more focused on self-service, where the clients can solve their own problems? If you decide to support the clients with their devices, it would make a lot of sense to do a remote diagnosis of all the equipment that are out in the field, instead of going to the field and seeing what's wrong with the products individually. Especially if you have to go far away in a farm in let's say in the jungle here in Colombia, it can take a lot of time and cost. Think about SIM card management before you start. Think also about how are you going to do if a product really fails, how are you going to do the maintenance and repair of products. For example, we found out that it is cheaper to bundle some products, send them to Colombia and do repairs here than it is to repair products in the United States at US labor rate and with the US postal service rates. And already mentioned before, over the air is a very big friend here for solving problems. So that were the 8 tips.
Awesome. I think we got a few more than 8 in there. So yeah, just a couple of minutes. I know we're slightly over, but if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and also feel free to kind of get in touch with us in privately if you want to. We've got our email addresses and websites on here. So one question we've had is, how do you prevent quality issues from escalating after production? I know sometimes there's things that you can't really predict once your product goes to market. What are some of the approaches you'd recommend for like kind of testing or preparing for things early?
Yeah, well, I can think of a few. One thing, for example, is we learned with our own voice that you can, for example, test your energy consumption of the devices before selling them. There are some really nice tools for helping you with that, where you can really measure like peak consumption. And where you can calculate, hey, what are my devices really consuming, and that helps you, for example, in which most products will have in estimating the right amount of battery power that you need. So that is one of the things that you can imagine. I would also say what it really helped us. We've had a lot of quality problems in the past, but we've always more or less been capable to manage them by keeping the batch sizes low. So at a LED light was one thing. If you have look carefully at the picture, you saw this big black handle in front. There was another thing that we encountered that we didn't think of before. And it is what happens if you have to clean a barn and you have to take all of the 40 scales out of the barn. Nobody's going to carry them one by one or treat them very nicely. And they all were like taking the products with the cables, taking them out of the barn, and they were damaging, of course, the electronics inside. So yeah, definitely we had a problem there with about 100 scales, but it's still something that we could relatively easily solve.
So there's other things too that I've seen that work very well. Is you have what's called end of line testing or in circuit testing, and so every single unit that comes off an assembly line gets its own functional operational test. And so it's to verify that that specific unit was assembled properly within proper specifications and tolerances. And so over time, through analytics, you can capture what's your yield rate, how many units are failing that initial test or having to go back through rework, or even if some of the tests, values are starting to shift. So maybe you have some loose tolerances and test limits on certain fields, but if the mean is starting to shift to the left or the right, you can start to predict that you might have some manufacturing process issues it may not be failing today, but it might fail in the next batch if the shift keeps happening. And so there's a lot of analytics that you can be capturing during your production runs, not only just for ensuring that those instances are actually working to your specifications, but that you can potentially even prevent, some further predictable maintenance or predictable issues that might come down the pike.
Totally, yeah. I would say another really useful thing that we've seen, at least for our customers, is that if you work with a lot of different projects at the same time, you start already recognizing similar products in from similar clients. So, for example, I'll give a very simple example. If you put your battery very close to the PCBA, the electronic board, there's a chance that the little pins on the PCB will damage the battery, and it will actually inflate, and it will stop your product from working. So we've seen it also with other customers, and we've immediately give them a warning, hey, this is something you need to change, because otherwise it is going to lead to failure. So working with different customers also has helped us in advising other customers as well.
Awesome. Yeah, lots to talk about there. I think we're going to wrap up since we're a little bit late, but thank you so much to both Wouter and Michael for all of those, your great insights and the tips. We thank you to everybody who joined us to hear more about scaling hardware. And please don't forget to answer the survey, which will appear after the event ends. And yeah, please reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Aphrodite. My fault totally that we will run over the time. I'm very enthusiastic about talking about these kinds of things. So yeah, if you have any questions, you want to know anything more, don't hesitate to contact me.